My name is Clara Holloway, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, I've been the quiet one, the logical one, the person my own family referred to, with a mixture of pity and condescension, as the Ice Queen. I was the human calculator they kept on a shelf, useful for balancing the books, but never for the big, passionate decisions that truly shaped our world. They never imagined I'd be the only one who could tame a hurricane named Julian Thorne, a man whose genius was matched only by his fury. And they certainly never dreamed that in becoming his partner, I would be the one to calmly and logically burn their legacy to the ground. This isn't a story about revenge, not really. It's a story about the quiet power of being underestimated. Before I dive into how a series of catastrophic meltdowns led to the most successful partnership of my life, I want to hear from you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like your true strengths were misunderstood by the people who should have known you best, hit that like button. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe, because this is a community for people who know what it's like to have to prove your worth, even when it should have been obvious all along. It all started, as most family disasters do, with money. Or rather, the lack of it. Holloway Robotics was my grandfather's dream, a company built on steady, reliable industrial automation. My father, Marcus, inherited it, and my older brother, Leo, was groomed to be its face. Leo was the son to my shadow. He had the easy smile, the firm handshake, the kind of charisma that could sell a ketchup popsicle to a woman in white gloves. I, on the other hand, had the spreadsheets. For 3 years, I had been presenting quarterly reports that showed a clear and terrifying trend. Our technology was becoming obsolete. Our market share was eroding. Our profit margins were shrinking to the point of non-existence. I presented it all in neat, color-coded charts and graphs. I spoke in calm, measured tones. And every single time, my father would pat my shoulder and say, "Thank you, Clara. Good numbers. Now, Leo, tell me about the new client you landed." My warnings were data points, abstract and cold. Leo's stories of schmoozing a potential customer over golf were tangible, exciting, real. They saw my logic as pessimism, my calm as a lack of passion. They didn't understand that my heart pounded with terror every time I ran the projections, that my passion was for the company's survival, not for cocktail parties and empty promises. The final warning came in the form of a letter from our bank, a crisp, formal notice that our primary line of credit was being called in. The company was 90 days from insolvency. Panic finally erupted in the boardroom, a room that had been deaf to my quiet alarms for years. It was a loud, messy, emotional panic. Leo paced the room, his hands tangled in his perfectly styled hair, his charm useless against a balance sheet. "There has to be a way. Another loan? A private investor?" he demanded, looking at our father for reassurance. My father, Marcus Holloway, a man who prided himself on his commanding presence, looked deflated. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped. He had aged a decade in the hour since he'd read the letter. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a magic trick I didn't have. "Clara, what do the numbers say we can do?" he asked, his voice strained. For the first time, he was truly asking. I laid out the brutal truth. We were too leveraged for another loan. Our intellectual property was too dated to attract any serious private equity. We had one and only one viable option. It was a long shot, a Hail Mary pass wrapped in a government contract. The Department of Defense was fast-tracking a massive project for next-generation neural integrated prosthetics, limbs that could be controlled by thought alone. It was the kind of project that could not only save Holloway Robotics but redefine it for the next 50 years. The contract was worth billions. The problem, as I explained, was that we only possessed half of the required technology. We were experts in advanced robotics and mechanical engineering, but we had zero expertise in the neural interface, the brain-to-machine connection that was the heart of the project. And the government's request for proposal was explicit. Only bids from fully integrated teams would be considered. There was only one person in the world who held the patents for the specific, low-latency interface the DoD required, a man named Julian Thorne. The silence that followed his name was heavy with dread. Julian Thorne was a legend, and not in a good way. He was a bona fide genius, a visionary who had dropped out of his doctoral program to found Thorn Industries, but he was also notoriously volatile. Stories about him were whispered at tech conferences and trade shows. He had once fired his entire executive board via a single, expletive-laden email. He had smashed a multi-million-dollar prototype with a fire extinguisher because he found a fractional imperfection in its power consumption. He was brilliant, paranoid, explosive, and utterly impossible to work with. He was also our only hope. "We can't work with him," Leo scoffed, recovering his composure. "He's a maniac. He'll destroy us from the inside." My father nodded in agreement, rubbing his temples.
"Leo's right.
The man is a liability." "We are 90 days from being a liability ourselves," I said, my voice as flat as the profit and loss statement in front of me. "The government's RFP mandates his involvement if we want to bid. They don't just want his patents, they want him. His name, his mind on the project. Our only option is to propose a partnership. We bring the robotics and manufacturing infrastructure. He brings the neural interface." My father looked at Leo, a silent conversation passing between them. It was the look they always shared. One that excluded me. The look that said, "What do we, the real leaders, think?" Finally, Leo straightened his tie, a warrior preparing for battle.
"All right. I can handle him.
Charm is the universal language. I'll be his best friend. We'll get this done." My father clapped him on the shoulder, relieved. "That's my boy." I said nothing. I simply made a note in my file. Charm, I suspected, was a language Julian Thorn did not speak. Julian Thorn did not arrive. He descended upon Holloway Robotics like a storm front. He was tall and lean, with a restless energy that seemed to make the very air around him vibrate. His dark hair was a mess, as if he'd been running his hands through it for hours, and his eyes, a startlingly intense gray, missed nothing. They swept over our lobby, our proud display of my grandfather's first robotic arm, and his lip curled in a faint sneer. Leo, ever the golden boy, stepped forward, his hand outstretched, his smile dialed up to maximum wattage. "Mr. Thorn, Leo Holloway, a real honor to have you. We are so incredibly excited to begin this journey with you." Julian looked at Leo's hand as if it were a strange, unhygienic insect. He ignored it completely and turned his gaze on my father. "You're Marcus Holloway. Your company's flagship product, the HR-7, has a 17-millisecond processing lag. A literal lifetime in industrial automation."
"Why?"
My father was taken aback, his prepared welcome speech dying on his lips. "Well, the HR-7 is a legacy model, known for its reliability." Julian waved a dismissive hand. "It's known for being slow. It's a fossil. Show me your R&D lab. I want to see if anything you've built in this century is worth my time." He strode off, leaving my father and brother sputtering in his wake. The first week was a masterclass in chaos. He declared our entire R&D department a monument to mediocrity. He called our lead engineer, a man who had worked for my grandfather, a sentimental dinosaur. He scribbled complex equations on white boards, then erased them in a fury when no one could keep up with his intuitive leaps. He drank coffee black and ate nothing but unsalted almonds and green apples, which he would crunch with a ferocity that set everyone's teeth on edge. Leo's charm offensive was a spectacular failure. Every attempt at small talk was met with a blank stare or a pointed question about thermodynamics. He tried inviting Julian to a high-end steak dinner with potential investors. Julian's response was a curt, "I don't ingest processed muscle tissue from dead bovines, and I don't fraternize with money-shuffling parasites." Leo retreated, bewildered and offended, his primary weapon rendered utterly useless. My father's attempts to assert his authority were even more disastrous. He tried to set a formal project schedule. Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I don't work on your clock, Holloway. I work on the project's clock. The project will tell me when it's ready. Your arbitrary deadlines are an insult to the creative process." After one particularly heated exchange, my father stormed out of the lab, his face flushed with anger. "The man is unmanageable," he roared later in the boardroom. He's a savage. 3 project managers quit in 4 days. The entire engineering team was on the verge of a mutiny. The multi-billion-dollar deal that was supposed to be our salvation was turning into an express train to ruin, and my family, the charismatic leaders, had no idea how to stop it. While they were all reacting, I was observing. I didn't engage with Julian directly. I stayed in my office or in a quiet corner of the lab and I watched. I read the reports from the terrified engineers. I analyzed the fragments of code he left on discarded monitors. I saw that his rages weren't random acts of madness. They were triggered by specific stimuli. He exploded when someone presented a conclusion without showing their work. He became incandescent with fury when faced with inefficient workflows or bureaucratic red tape. He saw intellectual laziness not as a minor flaw, but as a moral failing. He wasn't a maniac. He was a zealot, a high priest of pure, unadulterated logic. His outbursts were the result of a world that constantly failed to meet his impossibly high standards of intellectual rigor. So I started doing my own research. I pulled up every paper he'd ever published, from his peer-reviewed articles in prestigious journals to his angry, rambling manifestos on obscure online forums. I read his doctoral thesis, the one he'd abandoned just shy of completion. I learned about his theories on cognitive feedback loops and isomorphic data structures. I wasn't just reading the words. I was trying to understand the structure of his thought, the language of his mind. While my brother was trying to find the man's favorite sports team, I was mapping the architecture of his genius. This was what I did. This was what I had always done. I found patterns in chaos. It was a skill my family had never valued. I remembered being 8 years old, spending an entire afternoon meticulously sorting my collection of stones by geological type, size, and color gradient. I had built a perfect little museum on my bedroom floor. Leo had come in, kicked it all over to build a fort out of my pillows, and my parents had laughed, ruffling his hair. Such an imagination, my mother had said, beaming at him. When I had started to cry with frustration over my ruined work, my father had sighed. Don't be so fussy, Clara. It's just rocks. When I was 19, home from college for the summer, I'd spent 2 weeks analyzing the company's spending. I found redundancies in our purchasing, inefficiencies in our inventory management, and presented my father with a detailed plan that would save the company nearly $250,000 a year. He glanced at my report, patted me on the head, and said, "This is very thorough, sweetheart. Leave the big ideas to us men, all right." He then took Leo out for a celebratory lunch because he had secured a new, small-time client, a deal that would net the company less than $50,000. The message was always the same. Leo's messy, emotional, charismatic approach was imagination and big ideas. My quiet, logical, data-driven approach was fussy and thorough, but ultimately unimportant. I was the family's little calculator, useful for tidying up the numbers after the real work was done. They had never once considered that the calculator might be the only one who understood the whole equation. They saw a woman who was cold and passionless, never realizing that my passion burned just as brightly as theirs. It just fueled a different kind of fire. It was a quiet, blue flame of logic and order. A flame they were about to discover was the only thing that could withstand Julian Thorne's inferno. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A scream of pure, undiluted fury echoed from the main R&D lab, a sound so primal it made the fluorescent lights hum. I was in my office, reviewing supply chain logistics, and the sound cut right through my concentration. I walked briskly toward the commotion, my heels clicking on the polished concrete floor. The scene in the lab was one of controlled chaos devolving into outright panic. Julian Thorne stood in the center of the room, his face a mask of rage. In his hands, he held a heavy steel calibration weight. He was breathing hard, his eyes fixed on the centerpiece of the entire project, the prototype prosthetic arm, a beautiful, complex machine of carbon fiber and titanium that was worth more than my house. He was about to smash it to pieces. My father and brother were standing near the doorway, shouting at him. "Put that down, Thorne," Marcus yelled, his voice more panicked than authoritative. That's millions of dollars of company property. Leo was trying a different tack, his hands up in a placating gesture. Julian, hey, let's just talk about this. Whatever it is, we can fix it. Let's just all take a deep breath. This was like telling a tidal wave to take a deep breath. Julian's eyes narrowed, his knuckles white on the steel weight. The engineering team was flattened against the walls, watching in horror. 2 security guards were hovering uncertainly, clearly terrified of engaging the man who held the company's future in his hands. Everyone was focused on the emotion, on the anger, on the man. I wasn't. I was looking at the data streaming across the main diagnostic monitor behind him. My eyes scanned the cascading lines of code, the frantic scrolling of error messages. The others saw a man having a tantrum. I saw a brilliant mind drowning in frustration, pushed past its limit by a logical paradox. And then I saw it, a single, elegant, devastating flaw. While my father was still yelling about company property and my brother was babbling about breathing exercises, I walked past them. I walked calmly into the eye of the storm, right into Julian's line of sight. He glared at me, his chest heaving. "Get out," he growled, his voice a low threat. I didn't look at him. I looked at the monitor. I pointed to a specific block of code. My voice was even, cutting through the noise. "You're looking in the wrong place," I said. "The error isn't in the actuator's hardware. The microtremors aren't a mechanical failure." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. I had his attention. I continued, still focused on the screen. "It's a recursive loop in the sensory feedback algorithm. The haptic sensors are reporting pressure, but the interpretive layer is flagging it as an error and trying to correct for a movement that hasn't happened. You're creating a feedback cascade. The arm is fighting itself." The entire room went utterly silent. The only sound was the hum of the servers. My father and brother stared at me, as if I'd just started speaking in tongues. Julian Thorne slowly, very slowly, lowered the steel weight. He looked from the monitor to me, his eyes wide with a startling intensity. The rage was gone, replaced by a laser-like focus. "Show me," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of all its earlier fury. It was the most commanding sound I had ever heard. That moment changed everything. I wasn't Clara Holloway, the CFO, the Ice Queen anymore. I was the only other person in the room who spoke his language. I spent the next 2 hours at the terminal with him, not just showing him the error, but walking him through the cascading logic failures it had caused. He didn't speak much. He just watched, his focus absolute. When we finally isolated and rewrote the faulty code, he compiled it, ran the simulation, and the virtual arm on the screen moved with perfect, fluid grace. He leaned back in his chair and was silent for a full minute. Then he looked at me. "You're not like them," he stated. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I'm not." From that day on, I became his indispensable partner. But I didn't manage him. That's what my father and brother failed to understand. You couldn't manage a force of nature. Instead, I managed the environment around him. I created a sanctuary of logic, a bubble where his mind could work without the friction of the outside world. I started by reorganizing the entire R&D workflow. I implemented a system of clear, concise, data-driven progress reports. No more vague updates or subjective opinions. Every claim had to be backed by verifiable data. This simple change soothed Julian's most significant source of irritation, what he called intellectual dishonesty. Then I turned my attention to his personal environment. I had read his obscure forum posts where he'd ranted about the tyranny of analog clocks and the distracting flicker rate of standard office lighting. The next morning, his private lab had no clocks on the walls, and the overhead fluorescent bulbs had been replaced with full-spectrum LEDs calibrated to a precise color temperature. I stocked his personal mini-fridge with unsalted almonds, green apples, and a specific brand of cold-brewed coffee I'd traced from a stray comment in a 3-year-old interview. I became his firewall. All communication to Julian from other departments was routed through me. I would distill hours of rambling meetings and dozens of pointless emails into a few concise bullet points, presenting him only with the essential data he needed to make a decision. I was his translator, converting his brilliant but chaotic insights into actionable, step-by-step instructions that the engineering team could actually follow. The project, which had been on the verge of collapse, lurched forward with astonishing speed. We were making months of progress in a matter of weeks. My family's reaction was a predictable cocktail of relief, confusion, and simmering resentment. At first, they were just grateful that the screaming had stopped and the threat of imminent financial ruin had receded. "Well, my father said during a board meeting. "Clara, you've actually managed to tame the beast. Good work." It was meant as a compliment, but the condescension was still there. I hadn't tamed him. I had understood him. They were two very different things. The relief quickly curdled into jealousy as it became clear that Julian would now only work directly with me. My father would come into the lab with a suggestion, and Julian would just stare at him blankly until I translated the idea into a format he could process. Leo tried to reassert himself, to become the face of the project's success. He tried to join a critical design review. Julian stopped the meeting, looked at him, and said, "The adults are working, Leo. Go play with your crayons." When Leo tried to protest, Julian's voice dropped to a low growl. "I will only speak with Clara. She is the only one in this entire building who isn't a complete and utter moron. Now get out." The incident was humiliating for Leo and deeply unsettling for my father. They couldn't comprehend it. In their world, charisma and authority were the currencies of power. I had neither, yet I was the one in control. They started trying to go around me, holding secret meetings to strategize how to manage Julian. They saw my success not as a result of my unique skills, but as a temporary fluke, a situation that needed to be normalized by putting a man back in charge. Their attempts were clumsy and transparent. But each time they tried to sideline me, Julian's loyalty to our partnership only grew stronger. He saw their maneuvering for what it was: inefficient, illogical, and a threat to the project's integrity. He began to view me not just as a competent manager, but as his sole ally in a world of fools. One night, I found him still in the lab long after everyone else had gone home. It was almost 3 a.m. He was staring at a complex neural network diagram, his face pale with exhaustion. He hadn't stopped for over 72 hours. I didn't say anything about him needing rest. I just quietly placed a mug on the desk beside him. It was a specific type of imported Japanese green tea, one I'd read was exceptionally high in L-theanine, an amino acid that promotes calm focus. He looked at the mug, then at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is this?" he asked. "It's tea," I replied simply. "It will help with cognitive endurance." He took a tentative sip. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. We stood there in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the quiet hum of the servers. "Why do you do it?" he asked, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Do what?"
This.
"All of this." He gestured vaguely at the organized lab, the neatly filed reports, the mug of tea. "You anticipate everything. You smooth out all the edges. You create order." "I like order," I said. "Chaos is inefficient." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "They think you're cold," he said. "I've heard them. Your father. Your brother. They call you the Ice Queen when they think you can't hear." I didn't react. I already knew. "They think passion has to be loud," I said. He nodded, taking another sip of tea. "My first mentor, the professor who guided my initial research, he stole my first patent, published my work under his own name, said I was too young, too unstable to be taken seriously, said he was just stabilizing the asset. I learned then that the world doesn't reward genius. It rewards the people who can package and sell it." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a volatile inventor. I saw a man who had been profoundly betrayed, who had built a fortress of anger around his brilliant mind to protect it from a world that had tried to exploit it. And he looked at me, and I think for the first time he didn't see a cold calculator. He saw a woman who had built a fortress of logic around her own brilliant mind, to protect it from a family that had never bothered to understand it. In the quiet hum of the laboratory, two misunderstood souls had found a common language. And that alliance, forged in logic and mutual respect, was about to become more powerful than either of us could have possibly imagined. We were 3 weeks from the final government demonstration, the culmination of months of relentless work. The prototype was magnificent. It moved with a grace and precision that was more biological than mechanical. In early, off-the-record trials, it had shattered every performance metric the Department of Defense had set. The contract wasn't just likely, it was a certainty. A sense of cautious optimism had settled over the team. Julian was in a state of sustained, focused brilliance. His volatile edges had smoothed away, replaced by the white-hot intensity of a creator on the verge of completing his masterpiece. I was the conductor of this complex orchestra, ensuring every section, from software to supply chain, played in perfect harmony. For the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of profound professional satisfaction. We were building the future, and we were doing it flawlessly. But as our success grew more certain, so did my family's anxiety. My father and brother saw the future we were building, and they realized with dawning horror that they were barely a part of it. The government officials spoke to me and Julian. The key engineers reported to me. The press, who were already sniffing around the revolutionary project, wanted to interview me. Marcus and Leo Holloway, the patriarch and the heir apparent, were being relegated to the role of landlords. They were terrified of being sidelined in the company that bore their name, of becoming footnotes in the story of their own salvation. And that fear, combined with a lifetime of believing they were the smartest men in any room, led them to make a catastrophic, unforgivable mistake. They saw Julian's genius, now refined and channeled through our partnership, as an asset. And just like Julian's old professor, they decided it was an asset that needed to be stabilized. I discovered their betrayal by accident during a routine audit of our quarterly legal expenditures. There was an unusually large invoice from a specialized patent law firm we rarely used. It was labeled simply Project Chimera, Asset Consolidation. My blood ran cold. Project Chimera was the internal code name for our work. I called the law firm, used my authority as CFO, and demanded to see the work order. 20 minutes later, it was on my screen. My father and brother, in a stunning act of corporate sabotage, had instructed the lawyers to file for a comprehensive utility patent on the entire integrated system, the mechanics, the software, the neural interface, all of it, solely under the name of Holloway Robotics. They had used Julian's detailed design documents, which he had shared under our partnership agreement, as the basis for the filing. Their plan was insidious. Once the government contract was awarded based on our successful prototype, they would own the core intellectual property. Julian would be demoted from partner to a mere licensor of his original patents, cut out from the massive future profits and control of his own creation. It was a calculated, cold-blooded act of theft, disguised as a smart business move. The document on my screen was more than just a legal filing. It was the ultimate expression of how my family saw the world. It was a final, damning confirmation that they viewed brilliance, loyalty, and even me as nothing more than tools to be used, controlled, and ultimately discarded when they were no longer convenient. I printed the documents, the ink still warm on the page, and walked to the main boardroom. My father and brother were in there, laughing about something, looking relaxed for the first time in months. They looked up as I entered, their smiles fading slightly at my grim expression. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the patent application on the polished mahogany table and slid it toward them. My father frowned, picking it up. He read the first page, and I saw his face harden. Leo leaned over, his eyes scanning the document. His own mask of easy charm dissolved into one of defensive arrogance. Leo said, leaning back in his chair. Well, this is a bit awkward. It's theft, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's protecting the company, my father countered, his voice taking on the booming, authoritative tone he used when he expected no dissent. Thorn is a loose cannon, Clara. We all know it. This move ensures that his technology, our technology now, is secure under the Holloway umbrella. It's for the good of the family. The legacy. Our legacy? I repeated, a cold fury rising within me, a fury so pure it felt like ice water in my veins. Your legacy was insolvency. Your legacy was a pile of obsolete machines rusting in a warehouse. This project, this technology, was our lifeline. A lifeline built on Julian Thorne's mind and my work. And you're trying to sever it. Now, let's not be dramatic, Leo said, attempting a soothing tone. It's just business. Julian will be well compensated. And you, Clara, you've done a fine job as his handler. You'll have a place in the new structure, of course. Handler, the word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. That's all I was to them. Not a strategist, not a leader. A handler. An animal tamer. The boardroom door burst open. Julian stood there, his face thunderous. An engineer, loyal to the project and to us, had seen the legal filing on my desk and had run to warn him. He had clearly heard the last part of the conversation. His eyes were blazing with the incandescent rage I hadn't seen in months. He looked ready to tear the room, and everyone in it, apart. He took a step forward, a low growl starting in his chest. But before he could unleash the storm, he looked at me. He saw the cold, controlled fury in my eyes, an intensity that mirrored his own. I held up a single hand, a small, quiet gesture, and he stopped. He trusted me. The ice cream finally cracked. Not with tears, not with shouts, but with a terrifying, absolute calm. I turned my gaze back to my father and brother, who were now staring at Julian in fear. For 20 years, I began, my voice clear and steady. I've been the quiet one in the corner. The girl with the spreadsheets. You have dismissed my warnings, ignored my contributions, and patted me on the head while you ran my grandfather's legacy into the ground. You brought in a genius because you were desperate, and when he wouldn't bow to your charm or your bluster, you declared him a monster. You used me to communicate with him, to channel his brilliance, because you were incapable of doing so yourselves. I took a step closer to the table, leaning forward on my knuckles. The asset you're trying to stabilize is the only thing keeping this company from being a footnote in a bankruptcy filing. And the handler you so casually dismiss is the architect of its salvation. You didn't value either of us. You only valued what you could take from us. I straightened up, my decision made with a swift, irreversible finality of a closing circuit. So you can have your legacy. I looked from my father's shocked face to my brother's stunned disbelief. The partnership between Holloway Robotics and Thorne Industries is hereby dissolved, effective immediately, on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted intellectual property theft. Julian and I are forming a new entity. We are taking the technology, the patents he rightfully owns, the prototype we built together, and the key engineering staff who have already pledged their loyalty to the project, not to this company. We will be submitting our own bid, and we will fulfill the government contract ourselves. I let the words hang in the air, watching the comprehension dawn on their faces. I looked at my father one last time. You have nothing. No tech, no team, and as of this moment, no daughter. Then I turned my back on them, on the company, on my entire past, and walked out of the boardroom. Julian was right behind me, a silent, imposing guardian. We didn't look back as we left them in the stunning, self-inflicted ruin of their own greed. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Within hours, our lawyers had filed injunctions and sent official notifications to the Department of Defense. The news of the attempted patent fraud, coupled with the mass exodus of the entire top-tier engineering team, sent shockwaves through the industry. The government, whose primary interest was in a functional, stable project, took all of 24 hours to make their decision. They officially voided the Holloway Robotics bid and invited our newly formed company, which we named Nexus Neurodynamics, to submit a proposal. The Holloway Robotics stock, already fragile, didn't just plummet. It evaporated. The company my grandfather had built, the legacy my father and brother were so desperate to protect, was effectively worthless overnight. The first days of Nexus Neurodynamics were a whirlwind of focused, exhilarating chaos. We leased a cutting-edge R&D facility, and the team we'd brought with us worked around the clock, fueled by coffee, pizza, and a palpable sense of liberation. The atmosphere was electric. There were no useless meetings, no corporate politics, no arrogant executives trying to take credit for work they didn't understand. There was only the project. I took the role of chief executive officer, handling the business, the strategy, the logistics. Julian, as chief technology officer, was free to do what he did best: invent the future. We were no longer handler and genius. We were partners, true equals. We discovered a rhythm, a seamless synergy that made us more effective than either of us could have been alone. I would map out the strategic pathways, and he would light them with the fire of his innovation. One afternoon, he stormed into my new, minimalist office, looking agitated. The graphene supplier for the microactuators just fell through. The entire production timeline is shot. "We're ruined," he declared, his voice rising. In the old days, this would have been the prelude to a full-blown meltdown. I didn't flinch. I simply swiveled my monitor toward him, displaying a spreadsheet. "I flagged them as a risk 2 weeks ago due to their parent company's financial instability," I said calmly. "I've already vetted 3 alternative suppliers. Supplier B can meet our specs and deliver a week ahead of schedule for a 2% cost increase. Supplier C is cheaper, but uses a slightly different composite, which would require a 2-day recalibration. I recommend Supplier B. The paperwork is ready for your signature." Julian stared at the screen, then at me. The tension drained from his shoulders. He was silent for a moment, then shook his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first genuine, unforced smile I had ever seen from him. "You really do think of everything, don't you, Holloway?" "It's my job, Thorne," I replied, allowing myself a small, rare smile in return. "To see the whole board." Predictably, once the shock wore off, the messages from my family began. First came the threats, angry emails from my father's lawyers filled with empty, legal jargon. We ignored them. Then came the desperate pleas. An email from Leo appeared in my inbox one morning. The subject line was simply Clara. The text was uncharacteristically devoid of his usual swagger. Asterisk Clara, Dad is a mess. The company is gone. Everything is gone. We made a terrible mistake.
I know that now.
Please just talk to us. You're the only one who can fix this. Asterisk a few days later, a voicemail from my father. His voice, usually so full of command, was broken and halting. "Clara, I don't understand how this happened. You were always so quiet. I never thought. Please call me." I listened to the messages, my expression unreadable. I felt a faint, distant pang of something. Not pity, exactly, but a sad acknowledgement of their pathetic, self-inflicted destruction. They still didn't get it. They thought this was something I could fix, as if I could just put the pieces of their broken world back together for them. They didn't understand that I hadn't broken their world. I had simply stepped out of it and allowed it to collapse under the weight of its own dysfunction. I didn't delete the messages. I saved them in a folder I labeled Legacy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about evidence. It was a clear, cold reminder of the boundary I had drawn, a line that I would never, ever allow them to cross again. 2 years passed. 2 years of intense, relentless, and deeply fulfilling work. Nexus Neurodynamics wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. We delivered the prototype to the Department of Defense, and it exceeded every single benchmark. We won the contract, and our technology began to change the lives of wounded soldiers. But we didn't stop there. We adapted the neural interface for civilian medical use. We created prosthetics that allowed amputees to feel the texture of a loved one's hand. We developed systems that gave paralyzed individuals control over computers and wheelchairs with their minds. We were on the cover of every major science and technology magazine. They called Julian the Da Vinci of the digital age. They called me the architect, the calm, strategic force who had built the empire that housed his genius. I was at a major tech conference in Geneva, preparing to give a keynote address when I saw them. Across the vast, crowded convention hall, I saw my father and brother. They looked smaller, diminished. Leo was working a booth for some mid-level component supplier, forcing a smile at passers-by that didn't reach his eyes. My father wasn't working. He was just standing near a pillar, watching the flow of the crowd, a man adrift in a world that had moved on without him. Our eyes met across the distance. There was no anger in his gaze, no accusation, just a profound, weary sense of loss. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement, a concession, a final, silent admission that he had fundamentally misjudged everything. I held his gaze for a moment, and then I gave a cool, polite nod in return before turning back to the senator who was shaking my hand. The need for their validation, a hunger that had been a quiet, constant ache for my entire life, was simply gone. My worth was not a reflection in their eyes anymore. It was built into the very foundations of the company around me, in the lives our technology had changed, in the quiet, profound respect of my partner. Later that week, back in our main lab, Julian showed me our newest breakthrough. It was a non-invasive neural headset that could translate subvocalized thoughts into speech, a device with the potential to give a voice back to those who had lost it. He was buzzing with energy, talking a mile a minute, pacing back and forth as he explained the intricate data pathways. But it was a different kind of energy now. It wasn't the chaotic, explosive energy of before. It was focused, joyful, and creative. And the absolute key to making it work, he said, tapping a complex schematic on a holographic display, was restructuring the data flow exactly like you diagrammed it for the Q3 budget report last year. It's all about creating clean, logical pathways, minimizing friction. I never saw it that way before you, Clara. I always saw the engine, but you taught me how to see the whole machine. I looked at the beautiful, elegant design, the product of our perfectly blended minds. I looked at this brilliant, complicated man who saw me, truly saw me, for exactly who I was. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was not cold. I was not passionless. My passion was in the elegant solution, in the creation of order from chaos, in the quiet, relentless pursuit of progress. My family had looked at a calm surface and assumed there was no fire beneath. They never understood that some fires don't rage. They burn clean and hot and blue, and they can be powerful enough to forge a new world. Looking back, I realized that being underestimated was the greatest gift my family ever gave me. Their inability to see my strengths forced me to develop them in silence, to hone my skills away from the blinding glare of their expectations. They saw a quiet girl and assumed she was weak. They saw a logical mind and assumed it was passionless. They made the fatal mistake of judging a book not just by its cover, but by a cover they had written themselves. My story is a testament to the fact that your greatest perceived weakness might just be your most misunderstood strength. That calm demeanor they called cold was the focus that allowed me to see the solution in a crisis. That logical mind they called passionless was the very thing that could translate chaotic genius into world-changing technology. So I want to ask all of you, what is a strength of yours that someone else has mislabeled as a weakness? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe that sharing these experiences helps us all feel a little less alone in our struggles. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables and finding your own power. And please share this video with anyone you think might need to hear it. Remember that family is defined by love, respect, and understanding, not just by blood. Sometimes, the family you build is more important than the one you were born into. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you all the strength to be unapologetically, powerfully, and logically yourselves.